Oh, it's not on. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. We may get some additional members that will come in, but I want to start because we're a little late. So anyway, we're here today basically to look back on the productive year that we had in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. The progress, I'm very proud of the progress that we made this year with the leadership, outstanding leadership, I should say, of our vice chair and our subcommittee chairs. You know, we're going to hear from all of them to talk about the different things that they accomplished in the subcommittees and the full committee. But I do want to thank all of the, first of all, thank all the members, all our members that are here, and everyone for the great job they've done. And also the passion. I think that one of the things that I think is so great about our committee is there's so much passion on the part of the members, determination, commitment to the people and to the average person. I say to the little guy, which I think kind of is very much the case with everybody on the committee. Also the fact that we were able to advance so much legislation. Now, of course, we're all Democrats, and we're very proud as Democrats, and so what I've said so far, I'm applying to our Democratic members, but it is true that we do work in a bipartisan fashion, and whenever possible, we try to get, working with our ranking member, Greg Walden, and the Republican members of the committee to get things passed, because ultimately, if something's going to pass the Senate or be signed by the president, we have to have bipartisanship. So I do also want to commend, in particular, our ranking member, Greg Walden. So at the beginning of the year, we basically set out committed to certain policies. And I just wanted to mention them. One is to build a stronger economy, to create more good-paying jobs, to protect consumers from skyrocketing costs that make it difficult for them to make ends meet, and finally, to put us on a path to combat climate change, which is, of course, one of our major priorities. And I think over the last year, we've made progress in each of these areas. We've clearly put consumers first, fighting to lower health care, prescription drugs, and utility bills to lower the costs to consumers in health care, prescription drugs, and utility bills. We fought to ensure that all Americans have access to affordable and quality health care, safe drinking water, high-speed internet, and a cleaner environment. We've been working to strengthen our economy by rebuilding America and combating the growing threat of climate change. We've had legislation. And finally, we've conducted vigorous oversight Investigations Subcommittee of the Trump administration, so Washington works again for the people and not the special interests. Again, we're going to have the more specifics on this discussed by each of our subcommittee chairs. But I did also want to mention, before I introduce our vice chair, our action for the new year. And there's a lot more to do, needless to say. So we passed some critical legislation through the committee that has yet to make it to the House floor. So we have a number of bills in that category that are out of the committee but need to go to the House floor. And you know, some of those I'll mention: surprise billing, our youth tobacco epidemic bill to try to address that, PFAS, which should be on the floor the first or second week when we get back, asbestos, a ban on asbestos, which you also expect to come up in January. So those are a number of things that have actually passed out of the committee that we hope to bring to the floor in January or February. But again, I'm going to ask each of the subcommittee chairs to talk a little bit about what they've done in the subcommittees, and then if they want to talk about the things that we're going to bring up next year, they can as well. So I'm going to start now with our vice chair, Yvette Clarke. Come on up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the committee team for your extraordinary leadership. We've done some groundbreaking work in this first half of the session, and it's a pleasure to serve as the vice chair of the committee and to look back now on everything that we've accomplished. We are truly making progress for the people. Over the last year, we've been working hard to build a stronger economy, to put consumers first, to combat climate change, and to conduct robust oversight of the executive branch and the private sector. All told, over the last year, the committee held 84 hearings, 15 markups, advanced 62 bills to the floor. and sent 150 letters to the Trump administration, companies, and other entities as part of our robust oversight and committee investigations. I'd like to highlight a couple of our key accomplishments. We fought to strengthen our economy by restoring a free and open internet, ensuring the U.S. economy is not left behind in the transition to the green energy economy by passing legislation to prevent the president from withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, and advancing legislation to improve America's broadband maps and enhance telecommunications. We fought to put consumers first by making health care and prescription drugs more affordable, putting an end to illegal robocalls, and protecting consumers from PFAS contamination and exposure and dangerous consumer products. We also fought to combat climate change, not only by passing H.R. 9 to maintain our commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement, but also by putting us on a path towards achieving a 100% clean economy by 2050 in order to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. We are making progress for the people, but there's still much more to be done. It is critical that we rebuild America. Earlier this year, the full committee held a hearing on the Lift America Act, our comprehensive infrastructure package that is supported by every committee Democrat. Moving this legislation forward in the upcoming year will be a key priority of ours. It will strengthen our economy by creating new jobs and modernizing our infrastructure. It also combats and protects our communities from climate change by making major investments that will move us to a clean energy future, reduce carbon emissions, and increase the resilience of our most critical infrastructure. I am proud and pleased to work alongside all of my colleagues as we advance these groundbreaking initiatives, these imperatives for the American people, and all of our subcommittee chairs have been doing a yeoman's job in working for the American people and making progress. With that, it's my honor to introduce the Energy Subcommittee Chairman, Bobby Rush of Illinois.
I want to thank my chairman, Mr. Pallone, and I want to thank the vice chair of the committee. As we stand here in this room, the John Dingell committee room, I just want to take a note and to say that the work that we accomplished this year in some great sense was based on the work that preceded us by the chairman, John Dingell. This is his breastplate that I retrieved from his office when he retired. And I'm proud to have this memento of his work that he did for the American people. I am appalled, and I join with a chorus of others who demand that this midget called President Trump, that he apologizes to Debbie Dingell, to the people of Michigan, to all of America for his demeaning and ill-advised comments trying to tear down the work of an American giant. He can't even reach the souls of John, S-O-U-S-O-L-E-S, the soul of John Dingell's feet. And his words certainly are empty as he tried to demean the work of one of the finest Americans and finest members of Congress that this Congress has ever seen. Today presents an opportunity for further reflection as the year passes and focus our attention and our discussion on what's going to come about next year. And as the proud chairman of the subcommittee on energy, I appreciate the opportunity to call attention to some of the work that we have done in this past year. This year alone, we have enhanced public safety and security by seeking opportunities to modernize the electric grid, as well as passing legislation out of the committee to expand pipeline safety. We have made our country's energy infrastructure more effective by reinforcing energy efficiency in our homes and our buildings, including our federal buildings. We prioritize diversity in the clean energy workforce by moving the Blue and Green Collar Jobs Development Act. And we've contributed to the four committees' broader mission to create a clean energy economy to combat climate change. And we are just beginning to get started. In the spirit of John Dingell, we are, in the coming months, we will enact safety pipelines legislation, the Safer Pipelines Act, into law, which will improve pipeline safety and reduce methane emissions. We will hold the Trump administration accountable through effective oversight, ensuring that DOE finally updates and finalizes efficiency standards, and that the NRC does not roll back its reactor oversight. And we will ensure and work to ensure that the National Gas Act is serving the interests of the American people. Furthermore, we will ensure that all legislation to enable our transition to a cleaner, greener, and more diverse economy that benefits all America, rural, urban, minorities, majority, particularly low-income Americans. I remain steadfast in continuing this work and standing on the shoulders of John Dingell as we approach the second session of the 116th Congress. Our nation demands it. Our nation deserves that same commitment from each and every one of us. And I want to thank our chairman again, Frank Pallone. And with that, I yield to my distinguished colleague from California, the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Health, Ms. Anna Eshoo.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your 3,879 questions that have been fielded in the hallways of the Congress this year. I want to thank Chairman Pallone for his leadership, and I want to thank my colleagues for selecting me to lead the Health Subcommittee in the new Congress. Of the 62 bills that have been taken up by Energy and Commerce, the Health Subcommittee produced 31 of them. So this is a workhorse subcommittee, and I'm so proud of the members for the work that they have done. It's exceptional work. Here's a pile of it, and if any of you would like to go through it, you are most welcome to it. I think you all know that there was something that was a rarity in the 2018 midterm elections, and that is that health care was the #1 issue in every single congressional district throughout the country, all 435. So regardless of the makeup of the registration, whether it was pink, green, blue, red, yellow, whatever it was the #1 issue. And the Democrats ran on health care. We made promises, and I'm so proud that in the first half of this Congress that we have kept those promises to the American people. We delivered on that promise. The Health Subcommittee held 19 hearings. We passed 31 bills, amongst them to make prescription drugs affordable, to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, to end surprise billing, to address public health epidemics, including the devastatingly high maternal mortality rate in our country, especially for African American women. This is it is one of the saddest statistics to ever be associated with the United States of America, that the United States is the most dangerous place for African American women to give birth. I want to salute the members, most especially Congresswoman Robin Kelly, because she's been working on this long before the committee took it up. Also, the issue of a whole generation of children that will become addicted to e-cigarettes. It's a huge public health challenge that we have in our country, and we did yeoman's work on this. Each of these bills either had bipartisan co-sponsors or received bipartisan support in the committee or on the floor of the House. In May, the House passed 987, which combined 7 health subcommittee bills to unwind the Trump administration's sabotage of the Affordable Care Act and lower drug prices. The CBO said that this bill would increase health coverage for 5 million more Americans over the next 10 years. I think around here, when figures are stated, we don't always appreciate what that number is. 5 million is a lot of people, a lot of Americans, and that would be the first time that they would have coverage. And it also saves taxpayers billions of dollars. The subcommittee also held a series of hearings on drug pricing that led to passive passage of H.R. 3, named after Elijah Cummings. And you know what that bill contains, but I think that the most important byline for that legislation is the following. It is the most transformational change made to Medicare since President Johnson signed it into law in 1965. So it is transformational because it is comprehensive. Promise made, promise kept. In the 27 years that I've served here, I have never seen a CBO score such a jaw-dropping figure. $456 billion savings over the next 10 years. I've never seen a score like that in more than 2 decades. And that will lower health insurance premiums, which will then add to the net of what people earn and get to take home and live on. So lower drug prices, lower premiums, more patient protections. This is what the American people wanted. In fact, they demanded it when they went to the polls in 2018. I want to thank my staff, both Rachel Feibel and Ashleen McDonough. I also want to thank the subcommittee staff who have worked so hard. None of us can do this on our own. This is about a team that is not only committed to do the work, but underlying that commitment to do the work is the passion for it, And so I would say that this has been a highly productive year. I think you all know that I'm never satisfied. I want to do more, and so we will have an aggressive plan for 2020. And amongst, I think, one of the top line issues is our nation's drug supply. We are dependent on a foreign country for our generic drugs. 90% of the drugs that the American people take today are generics. We know from our hearings that this is not only a national security issue, but it is a domestic issue that needs to be addressed. We have subpar manufacturing, we have tainted products, we have shortages, and we need to really undertake a whole revision of our nation's drug supply, and in my view, bring manufacturing of these drugs back to the United States of America, because the American people deserve to have confidence that when they unscrew the cap of their prescription drug bottle, that it is safe, that it isn't tainted, and it is not a product of subpar manufacturing from China or elsewhere. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure now to recognize the woman that chaired and oversaw a historic day on the floor of the House, but also does historic work here at the Committee at Oversight and Investigations, Diana DeGette.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our Vice Chair as well. We all owe John Dingell a debt of gratitude who are standing here, because John Dingell is the person who made the Energy and Commerce Committee what it is, with its extensive jurisdiction. And we're hearing from all of our substantive subcommittees today, but the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee is obviously very important on this committee, and it was John Dingell who really gave it the meat and the teeth, because the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee has jurisdiction over everything that all of my other wonderful colleagues are going to be talking about. And I was so honored to be chosen to be chair of this subcommittee in this Congress. When I started as chair, we instituted a really radical but simple concept for conducting the committee. It was that we are going to base everything we do on science. And this is probably the first time in a while that we've done that. And so we've had a number of science-based hearings that can help us get to the root of issues and can help my colleagues who chair the substantive committees develop science-based legislation. As you heard from Vice Chair Clark, the committee has held more than a dozen hearings. We've sent more than 150 letters to companies and federal agencies seeking information, and we've launched numerous investigations on a wide variety of issues. Most of these investigations have been bipartisan investigations, and I'm very proud of the bipartisan nature that we've had in a subcommittee that can often be contentious. For example, we held hearings to address the rising cost of insulin, which is of critical importance in this country, and as some of you have heard, even in my own family. And people say, well, so what good is investigation? So what about O&I? I will tell you that when we announced that we were having our hearings on insulin pricing, just by coincidence, in the week and day around when we had that hearing, all the major production companies announced new programs to give rebates or to develop biosimilars or to have some kind of insulin price competition. We also just recently had a hearing on the FDA's failure to fully protect our nation's drug supply, and I'm going to be working closely with Chair Eshoo as she develops her legislation on this important issue. We held hearings on the Trump administration's abhorrent policy of ripping children from their families at the border and the failure to protect our environment. We had 4 former EPA administrators come in, 3 of them Republicans, to talk about the devastating impact the Trump administration has had on the EPA. We're working to tackle the nation's opioid epidemic, the teen vaping epidemic, and private equity firms' role in the practice of surprise billing. So That's just a few things we've done. We also continue ongoing investigations over our nation's labs, energy labs. We had a hearing on flu just a week or two ago, not just seasonal flu, which is one of the top killers of Americans, but also the dangerous potential of pandemic flu. And we are going to take these responsibilities very, very seriously in the next Congress. We're expecting to have numerous more evidence-based hearings on the topics I've talked to you about, continuing our oversight, and also some new and important topics that are facing the American public. And with that, I'm happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Representative Doyle, who's going to tell us what the Communications and Technology Committee is working on. Mike?
Thank you, Diane. Good morning, everyone. Our committee's been busy this year and productive, and I'm proud to say that virtually all the bills that we have marked up and sent to the House floor were done in a bipartisan fashion. Many of them voice voted with unanimous votes from both Republicans and Democrats, and we saw overwhelming votes on the House floor. So this is a committee that has a history of working in a bipartisan fashion. Also think it's interesting that, that we want to address this false narrative out there that this Congress, that this House has not been legislating, that all we've been doing is trying to impeach the president. This committee's been very active. This House has legislated. There are over 400 bills sitting over there in the Senate. 276 of them are bipartisan bills, waiting for the Senate to legislate. And I think that's an important point that sometimes gets lost with all the other things going on in Washington, D.C. today. But I'm very proud of the work we've done and what we've accomplished in the Communications and Technology Subcommittee. We started out the year by passing the Save the Internet Act, which would restore net neutrality rules at the FCC and provide critical protections to millions of consumers and innovators, first responders, small business people, and most importantly, put a cop back on the beat to make sure that we have a level playing field for consumers. This bill is immensely popular outside of Washington, D.C. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, 80% of the public wants to see this bill passed. It sits over in the Senate. It's been there for quite some time. We hope the Senate will take it up in 2020. We also passed the Pallone-Thune Traced Act. This is a bill to address the robocall epidemic. Again, a tremendously popular bill and bipartisan bill. It's my understanding that the Senate may pass that bill today or hopefully very soon and be signed into law in the next week or so. We passed the Television Viewer Protection Act. This is legislation to guarantee consumers billing transparency on their cable and satellite bills. We give parity to small cable companies when they're negotiating with large broadcast groups, and provisions were put in there to provide a permanent backstop at the FCC to prevent programming blackouts. This legislation was included in the appropriation package that just passed the House. We also passed legislation to address our nation's abysmal and broken broadband maps. This legislation finally puts our nation on the right track when it comes to these maps and gives us one of the essential tools we need to ensure broadband deployment to unserved and underserved communities and to close the digital divide. You can't make good decisions, and you shouldn't be spending money at the FCC without good data. And everyone, Democrats and Republicans alike, acknowledge that the current maps are a disaster. And so this was important legislation. The House also passed legislation to secure our nation's telecommunications infrastructure against untrusted equipment from foreign adversaries. As our nation and our economy become more dependent on broadband infrastructure, we need to ensure that the equipment that enables our economic prosperity doesn't pose a threat to us as well. The committee also exercised much-needed oversight of the industry, of the Federal Communications Commission, and the Trump administration. It's my hope that we can continue to bring light to these issues with further oversight in the new year. I also hope that we can work on legislation to more effectively and harness and leverage our nation's wireless spectrum and expand opportunities for 5G and unlicensed services. The C-band, in particular, offers an opportunity for an incredible win-win on making spectrum available for 5G and funding some of our nation's most pressing telecommunication needs. I hope that we will examine how we can make our nation's telecom infrastructure more resilient to ecological disasters that climate change is causing. And finally, I hope and expect that we will examine a range of issues related to media ownership, diversity, and inclusion. The Trump FCC has run roughshod over the Communications Act and the Congress, and we intend to hold them accountable. Let me just close by saying I know how much you're all going to miss us as we leave today, and I hope you all were able to go home and spend time with your families and enjoy the holiday season, and we'll see you all bright and cheery when we get back January 7th. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jan Schakowsky, Chair of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee. Jan?
Thank you. I want to thank Chairman Pallone for his leadership, but I also want to tell you what a pleasure it is to be here in this John Dingell hearing room, an icon in our country and in the state of Michigan, and also an American hero, someone who is responsible for the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act throughout his career, and so highly regarded in a bipartisan way. And we're so happy that his wife, Debbie Dingell, is here on our committee. So I have been a consumer advocate all of my life, and it is really a joy now to be the chair of the subcommittee on consumer protection and commerce, working to protect consumers every day and advancing legislation that gets dangerous products off our shelves and away from our kids. We also passed legislation to reauthorize funding for Brand USA, a program to promote travel and tourism from abroad, and the U.S. Safe Web Act that was introduced by my ranking member, Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, and to protect consumers from foreign scams. We passed through the subcommittee and full committee 6 bills to protect American families from common household dangers, such as furniture tip-overs, a real danger to children when those dressers actually have killed many children when they tip over. Incline sleepers and crib bumpers, once again, we are saving lives by making cribs safer for our babies. We have carbon monoxide poisoning legislation to avoid that, portable fuel containers that explode, and flammable furniture, which is a hazard in terms of the chemicals and a hazard to our firefighters. The 6 bills will save countless lives and ensure Consumer Product Safety Commission to act quickly and to enforce the laws. One of the goals that we have is not to go product by product by product to make our marketplace safer, but to help wake up the Consumer Product Safety Commission to actually do its job, and we're working closely with them, and to educate consumers about these common household dangers. Every one of these bills has passed the House and is among those awaiting action in the Senate. We held 2 hearings in the subcommittee on bills to make cars in America safer. Motor vehicle death rates have actually increased since 2014, and it's our responsibility to reverse this trend. We launched a bipartisan investigation into practices of the live event ticketing industry. These investigations will target high hidden fees, speculation on tickets, and that harm consumers. A lot of interest out there in that investigation. And looking ahead, we're going to continue to do our productive work on comprehensive data privacy and security. Many of you, I think, are aware that just yesterday we released a staff draft of this legislation, and we have a transparent and inclusive process asking all the stakeholders to give their feedback by January 24th. And we're certainly going to be continue to work to protect consumers in that sector. So we are very proud of the robust work that we've been doing. We do consider ourselves the subcommittee that is every day working to save lives and improve lives, along with my colleagues on all the other subcommittees. Thank you so much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce someone who is working on what we all see now as an existential issue, and that is Paul Tonko, who is the chair of the Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee.
Thank you, Jan. And good morning, everyone, and happy holidays. I'll echo the sentiments of my colleague Mike Doyle, Representative Doyle, in extending to you the best and encouraging you to share that time away from the Hill with family, friends, and loved ones. It's just great to be here with you to share the success of a committee that has been very robust in its pace and very, very focused in its outcome, and proud to be serving on a committee that has been part of the many bills of the 400 plus that rests on Majority Leader McConnell's desk to have the Senate take action. I particularly want to thank our chairman, Frank Pallone, for his awesome leadership. He's very generous with his time and allows us to really move as subcommittee chairs to offer what we believe is the best response to the issues to which we're assigned. I want to thank our vice chair, Yvette Clark, a fellow New Yorker, who also is very much engaged with the subcommittees. I thank my fellow chairs on the committee and the general members for being part of a group that I believe has really provided great sensitivity to the people of this nation, have poured forth their intellect on the particular issues to which they're assigned, and we have all done it with great passion, as has been stated here many times over. I personally want to thank my committee, subcommittee staff, that has really worked and engaged itself in like a very overtime fashion, burning the midnight oil, along with my personal staff. I see my Chief of Staff, Clinton Britt, here today, and Brendan Larkin in the back of the room, who have been very involved in this issue. But we have been a very active subcommittee, working on issues like PFAS and asbestos, nuclear waste, and certainly making certain we do not withdraw, as Kathy Castor would encourage as representative of Florida, that we not withdraw from the Paris Accord table, that it'd be very important for us to be part of that worldwide discussion on what is a global crisis. We have invested an awful lot of time and energy into legislative and oversight efforts that enable us to respond to something that might be kept a very strong secret, but I'll share it with you. The environment is under attack by this administration, if you haven't noticed. And so we need to make certain that aggressively we respond to the protection of our earth, and to make certain that our stewardship as it relates to environment is as sound as it can be. We also know that we have a no-show in the administration when it comes to dialogue on climate crisis. And so we need to make certain that we continue to lead in those efforts. I particularly want to thank, in a special way, Representative Shimkus, who has been chair in earlier sessions and now is ranker on the subcommittee. We're proud of the bipartisan spirit that we have engaged and hope that will deliver a full-fledged effort on behalf of the climate response. The subcommittee, as I indicated, has done a lot of oversight efforts as it relates to the Trump Environmental Protection Agency. That has ranged from TSCA implementation to clean car rules to being committed to holding the administration accountable in protecting public health. We've heard about the many rollbacks that are recommended and addressed by this administration when it comes to clean air and clean water. We're also in the process of finalizing the discussion draft of our 100 by 50 climate effort, which was announced several weeks ago by the committee and subcommittee chairs. We'll be making an announcement in the next month on those details and plan to continue our hearings, but much of the year has been invested in hearing from the stakeholders as it relates to this issue. We're making certain that in our efforts to be science-based, evidence-based, we're hearing from all perspectives, ranging from the environmental community to the business community, to the industrial community, certainly to the utility community, to the consumers, to the environmental justice advocacy groups. We want to make certain that all efforts are expressed and all concerns are heard. We also want to make certain that as we go forward, we need to get a number of issues over the finish line. In 2019, we were proud of the efforts that the committee advanced on a bipartisan basis that pertain to legislation to ban asbestos and to take robust action on PFAS. PFAS, a contaminant that has drawn great attention and is of great concern in many of the districts, congressional districts across this country. We will pass both the PFAS Action Act and the Alan Reinstein Ban Asbestos Now Act in the House next year. If I have anything to say about it, if we can push our subcommittee, and we will get that done. The PFAS debate has been illuminating in recent months. I think it is now clear that we need to reform the way drinking water standards are set. EPA has failed to set a single new standard without congressional direction since 1996. And we need to rebalance the Safe Drinking Water Act to prioritize public health and allow for standard setting that protects all Americans. You know, we know that there was work done with the Defense Act, but we believe this issue is of such importance and with such urgency that it needs to stand in its own right and be addressed in a bipartisan, bicameral way that will provide for public health standards and public health safety so that we move forward having done our work in fullest fashion. So with cleanup efforts and with drinking water standards, we can get it done. So again, I thank the committee, I thank its leadership. Thank you, Chairman Pallone, thank you, Vice Chair Clark. Let's go forward and score all those victories for the people in this coming year. And thank you for your kind attention to the issues across the months of the last year. You have been great in getting the message out. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Let me thank Paul and all our subcommittee chairs and our vice chair, also Yvette Clark, you know, for all the things that they've accomplished and that they laid out at this press event. We'll take some questions, and again, if the members who are not the subcommittee chairs would like to respond to some of the questions, please don't hesitate. Sure. Well, I think, look, you know that H.R. 3, look, that's our bill, and it's a bill that I think, if passed by the Senate and signed into law, would just be tremendous in terms of reducing drug pricing, and not only that, but also the savings, as you mentioned, which are huge, would be used to expand benefits under Medicare for, you know, we'd have a dental benefit, a vision benefit, a hearing benefit, cap on out-of-pocket costs, funding for additional research at NIH, so many things. I honestly believe that, you know, that at some point, Mitch McConnell and President Trump are going to have to revisit this and join our efforts, and that's what we're going to try to push for, because the bottom line is, as you know, the Republicans say that they are for legislation that would reduce drug prices, but at the same time refuse to, at least in the House and the Senate, say that they don't want to do negotiated prices. I don't see how you could possibly achieve significant reduction in costs for prescription drugs if you don't have negotiated prices. The president said when he ran, and until, you know, relatively recently, that he would support negotiated prices, and I expect at some point he'll come back to that, and we're just going to keep pushing the Senate to try to achieve that. Without negotiated prices, I don't think that you can achieve any major savings. So that's going to be our goal. Yeah. Well, as Congressman Tonko mentioned, we have our 100 by 50 goal, which we announced in July. We had a series of hearings that he presided over, and we actually finished, to the point where we have a draft that we're going to discuss and, have another press event about in January to show that, what this legislation or discussion draft would be. So, we'll come back in January and give you more detail about that. But the idea is to come up with legislation for those climate action issues that are within our committee, and then try to get a consensus not only with the Democrats but also with the Republicans, if at all possible. I mean, I'll let Paul. Do you want to come up and
Well,
add to that?
all along, we have said we've approached this through a two-track scenario. One where there's more commonly hoped progress on items like conservation, efficiency, weatherization, charging stations, research, hoping that we can do a bipartisan, bicameral approach to at least add to the carbon footprint reduction. The second track would be, to approach the pricing on carbon. But while we have a president that's a denier and a delayer in the White House, we have the time available to put together the best product. And so while we've had a very robust schedule of hearings and roundtable discussions to hear from all the perspectives, it's like drinking out of the fire hose. And so we have a lot of information, concerns, recommended solutions that have come forth. We're assembling all of that in a very multi-perspective approach and trying to address a host of dynamics under the umbrella of climate and as a solution, as a response. And hopefully, and as the chairman indicated, we will, in the very near future, have a draft legislation that will then allow for those same perspectives to come back and fine-tune and use that time wisely, because there is a crisis out there, and if we're accepting, as we do, that rhetoric, let's act accordingly and address the urgency that it is veiled in.
Go ahead, Scott.
Sure. I'm proud to be a member of the Energy and Climate Change Subcommittee, as well as Energy. I just want to say that to reinforce what Mr. Tonko said, we're going to come up with this major bill that covers a wide range, kind of comprehensive way of climate issues. But I think we're going to make a lot of progress chipping away issue by issue. And I think it's probably how you're going to have to handle it anyway. You decarbonize various sectors of the economy. You're going to, whether it's electricity, transportation, agriculture, aviation, industry. We have to deal with climate pricing, carbon pricing. I think we need to deal with short-term climate pollutants, particularly methane. There's some bipartisan opportunity there. And negative emissions technologies. All those things are things we can work on, get bipartisan support for, even if we can't get the major comprehensive legislation done because of Mr. McConnell's attitude. It is very frustrating to do this work and then have it sit over there. I think that's kind of our reality. I think if he continues to maintain that he doesn't have to work on these things, that he could have a electoral problem. At the same time, I don't want to send our candidates out without having done scored some successes here on the floor in climate, drug pricing, whatever.
Other questions? I don't know. Why don't you decide, Andrew? Go ahead. Well, look, my view is that if we don't have negotiated prices, we're not accomplishing anything. So I'm not saying that there aren't other things out there, But that's the thrust of HR 3. You know, HR 3 has other provisions, obviously, but if we don't have negotiated prices, and if we don't accomplish that, then we're really not addressing the drug pricing issue in a meaningful way. And so that's what I'm pushing for. All right, well, he says one, but we'll take two. Why don't we do, we'll ask you, and then we'll go back there. Go ahead. So you understand, I mean, the Select Committee is going to issue a report in March, and they will make, presumably, recommendations that might or might not include specific legislative language. But they and the leadership have made it quite clear that they are welcoming any kind of legislation or action that the committees of jurisdiction have. So, you know, we, for example, Natural Resources did a package last week that dealt with resiliency. Our bill that, you know, we'll present to you, you know, when we get back, will be actual draft legislation that addresses the climate action issues within our jurisdiction. They will then, my understanding is that they will look at that, they'll look at what comes from other committees, you know, whether it's science or natural resources or whatever, and they'll issue a report in March. But then the bills that they recommend or don't recommend, whatever, we would then take up. So the idea is that the committees will come up with legislation if they desire. That's what we're going to give you in January. Select Committee would review those and make recommendations, but in terms of actually moving bills, they would come back to the committees of jurisdiction. So with the bill that we're putting together, we're basically saying this is what our committee would like to do. We'd like to have bipartisan support, and we do intend to move it in conjunction with other legislation that comes out of other committees to address climate action. You had a question? You're the last one, I guess. Oh, absolutely. I think I already called for her to resign. If I haven't, well, I guess I haven't, but yes, you can add me to the list. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Yvette.
Thanks, everybody.
I will leave that.